Hi, Misha here. Let's talk about a couple of kind of unusual ships from Star Trek, at least for that universe. Both from Voyager, both from the Krenim Imperium. And these are the two models we have from the Eagle Moss collection. Early on, within the first, towards the end of the first year, we got this ship, the Krenim weapon ship, or the Krenim time ship. And quite late in the last year, or nearly so, of the collection, we received the Krenim warship, or battleship. So this was issue 22, this is issue 149. Both are, of course, die-cast models, the usual. And they are a very interesting kind of thing for Star Trek that tends to stick to a lot of conventions. And to me, this is more of what would have been neat to see in Voyager in the Delta Quadrant, because neither one looked like something you would find in the Alpha. And they kind of both look like they might be a organic or biomechanoid ship, but they're not. They're just standard ships, just a very different design. Kind of have a sea creature thing going on. This is kind of a squid look. And this one reminds me of something, maybe kind of has the basic lines of even like a Ferengi Marauder, although the details are different. Kind of a pincer crab thing. And as my wife pointed out, and as some people, they look like something from Babylon 5, especially the weapon ship here. But even this too. Maybe Vorlon or something. These are the two we have in the collection. Not bad. There is one more Krenim ship, the Krenim Patrol ship, which was a smaller, lighter armed version. The patrol ship was around 125, 150 meters with a crew of 15. It was capable of lower warp speeds and had limited armament. Comparing that, the weapon ship here is quite a bit larger and more powerful. As to the weapon ship, I meant the warship. I'll probably mix those up before we're over. This is about 500 meters, so larger than an Intrepid class, but smaller than a Galaxy. It had a crew of roughly 300. It had shields and pretty conventional beam weapons, but its main weapons were two launchers in the front that fired chronoton torpedoes, basically time torpedoes, and these were out of phase with regular whatever reality until they detonated, and this meant they could pass through shielding. These ships were pretty powerful in the shield and hull department, but were somewhat limited on speed and maneuverability. Don't really know a maximum warp. It was at least max of 6, probably more. And these are the main warship of the Krenim Imperium. But the big ship of the Krenim, kind of their Death Star, is the time ship, the weapon ship, the time weapon ship here. This is very long. It's about 1,500 meters, so 1.5 kilometers. We don't really know the crew as far as I know, but didn't seem to be huge, considering most of the mass is the weapon in the front here. I'd say at least half, so 750 or more meters is the weapon itself. This we know was only limited to warp 6 as a max speed because of its size and complexity, and probably the energy requirements of the weapon. While its temporal weapon was the main feature, the main offense of it, it did have more conventional beam, phaser, disruptors. It probably also had chronoton torpedoes. And it was pretty lightly shielded and armored. But that's because it did not need heavy armament. It had a temporal core, which not only protected it from the timeline and changes, it also kind of kept the ship itself out of phase, meaning that it was nearly impervious to damage. And that's really kind of where it begins with this. This was a prototype ship. It was designed by a military scientist named Red Foreman. The initial concept was for this whole front section to be a giant foot, and it would be used to put itself in the ass of alien races. But testing revealed this to be less effective than hoped for, so the next attempt was a temporal weapon. After watching Star Wars, the Krenim decided they could one-up the Death Star able to destroy a planet or a ship with a beam. Their weapon could completely erase a planet or ship with a beam, not just from the moment onward, but through the entirety of existence and just history, just completely wipe it out. So it's basically a balefire from the Wheel of Time. Some might even get that reference. So it was a very specific ship with a very specific goal. And this was created in the mid-22nd century, so the 2100s, and was launched around 2170, 2175. And when Voyager first encounters it in the two-part episode, Year of Hell, in 2374, it had been doing its thing for roughly 2 centuries. It was launched to defeat the Krenim's enemy, which had obviously erased from time, which started a whole chain effect to the timeline. And that's where this ship kind of is around. Now, the Krenim warship here, we actually first saw in Season 3 in an episode called Before and After, which was with Kez. It's one of the few times that Voyager kind of harkened back. When they got to Year of Hell, it harkened back to the episode Before and After, which was a Season 3. In that episode, Kez begins transforming or going back in time at her death in 2379, and in 2374 while she's going back in time, is there for the events of the Year of Hell. And when they stabilize her out around 2373, she tells Janeway about the Krenim and their chronoton torpedoes that are going to wreak hell in a year or so. But of course, by that time, in our main timeline, Kez is gone from the show and replaced by bigger assets. And so 7 of 9 kind of takes her role of finding the torpedo in the episode, and throughout changes in the timeline done by the weapon ship, the warship is transformed into a patrol ship and then back into a warship, and either way it proves to be a very deadly and very capable combat vessel. But regardless of the time ship, at the end, when Janeway utters a very 80s catchphrase of "time's up" and rams what's left of Voyager into the ship and destroys it, breaking the temporal core, yada yada, the time ship ends up not ever having really been made. But research was done on it, so in the prime or ultimate timeline for 2374, the Krenim Imperium is a falling, declining empire. At one time they had over 900 planets, and at this point they're quite far down. And so, by the end of the 24th century, they're pretty much just a shadow of their former selves. It is interesting to see an empire on the decline, because typically in Star Trek we kind of witness the other direction. But yeah, their main period was at the time when the Federation was being formed, and while they tend to be a bit of an arrogant race, they are technologically advanced, and they're not especially bloodthirsty. It would have been nice to get more with them, to have them more of a reoccurring villain, kind of like they've done with the Herosian or the Kazon, but at least we saw them in 3 episodes, and yeah, their ship designs are quite different, and they were designed on a television budget, and they were designed very early CGI, so 1996 for this ship, and 1997, I believe, for this ship. And it shows with the relatively low polygon thing, which is kind of interesting too, though, because that's kind of how Babylon 5 ships came to be. They too were designed on a very tight budget, with the use of very early CGI assets. But I do like that the Krenim ships don't look like your typical Klingon birds or Romulan birds or even Cardassian ships. They have their own look. And at first these may not seem to be from the same fleet, which makes sense because they're different timelines, but I would say it's not 100% true. They're both very rounded shapes, very organic looking, even though they are just mechanical. And keeping in mind that this is 3 times the size of this, so this whole warship would be the size of like the rear section or the center section of this ship. But it makes sense because the time ship here is pretty simple. We have the front weapon. Then we just have a ball, which is pretty much the crew quarters and computer core and everything. And then we have the rear section, which is propulsion and whatnot. It's a neat design. Again, it's kind of like they took a Death Star and one-upped it. Obviously, it's physically smaller, but Star Trek stuff's always smaller. So I guess this means this is kind of the Krenim Star Destroyer, which makes sense because it is powerful. And it is a dedicated warship. This isn't really an exploratory ship or what have you. But I think it's one of those episodes. Certainly one of the best Kess episodes in Season 3. And Year of Hell is one of the better 2-parters of Voyager. I enjoyed it when it came out anyway. And early on, of course, like I said, this was in our collection and it was nice to have, and I was hoping they would do more Krenim ships, and had almost given up when finally they released the warship here. Now the warship model is pretty standard, relatively light. It does plug into the stand well. Actually, both these do. You'd think being in the rear, being kind of small, it would kind of wiggle, but actually it fits very well. A lot of polymer in this. It does have a metal core though. So most of your weight's in the head. That's plastic. Keeping in mind that the original studio model, CGI model, was pretty limited in its polygons. Does alright. Nice to have to complement our time ship. Now this is one of the better alien ships, better ships in the, oops, I'm going to do that, collection. See, it rolls. It, as you saw there when I accidentally dropped it, the weight is pretty much all in the back. It almost would stand. The rear section here is all metal. The ball is majority metal. Feels like it's kind of a mix. And then the weapon in the front is all polymer, which makes sense because of all the rings and stuff. This is certainly one of the neat ones because it's a unique design. It's from a popular episode. It's well built. And it just kind of sits cradled in. Make sure I'm filling it the right way. There are these kind of little balls on the side. And it sits very securely, but it also just cradles in there. But yeah, both of these come with nice stands and fit their stands well. And while some of Voyager's aliens, if I can get this one in, I didn't be able to do this one one-handed. While some of Voyager's aliens are kind of meh, like the Kazon, others, like this, well, Kazon, I would say the Malon are kind of too. There we go. They both plug in very well. In fact, this really does. You don't even want to fall out. Others aren't bad. I like the Herosian. I know that they're basically Predator, Predator light, Predator copies, but I don't care. I like Predator. I grew up in the 80s. Leave me alone. And they had some other interesting adversaries, like, for example, the Think Tank, led by George Costanza. Which I don't believe they've done a model of, have they? I feel like they were going to, and they haven't. I don't know. But, yeah, just felt like doing a Krenim episode. The whole time travel aspect is quite well done for Star Trek. And, the scientist interacts, although the actor really is Red Foreman, is very compelling. He's not completely two-dimensional. A little bit of a complex going on, but he's certainly insane. But, he has a little bit of depth to him, and his interchange with Chakotay is nice. It actually gives Chakotay something to do for once. So, yeah, thought I'd do a little video. What do you think on both the models and the whole Krenim concept? Well, let me know. As always, if you could, like, share, and subscribe. This is Misha, and I'll catch you very soon. Sometime. Maybe, if I don't get erased from the time continuum thing.